Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this joint audit and standards committee. I am Councillor Dave Muller and I am chairing the meeting today. May I first of all remind you of some of the domestic arrangements. 1. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. 2. That you do not interrupt other speakers. 3. That if you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. And fourthly, please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. I'd now like to make some introductions. The officers attending the meeting today are Emily Yule, the Monitoring Officer, Catherine Steele, Assistant Director for Corporate Resources, Melissa Evans, Corporate Manager of Financial Services and Commissioning and Procurement, Rebecca Hewitt, Assistant Manager of Financial Accountant, and John Snell, the Corporate Manager for Internal Audit. Can I now move to the agenda, please? Item 1 is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Caston.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Item number 2, to receive declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest by members. Are there any to declare, please? No. Okay. I'd like to move then to item 3, which is JAC 2012, confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of the Joint Audit and Standards Committee held on the 25th of January 2021. Are there any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes, please? Okay, could I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Hurren?
Yes, Chair, I can propose them. I've read them and they seem accurate reflection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a seconder, please. Councillor McCraw.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you very much. I will now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the electronic vote. Thank you, Mandy.
Thank you, Chair. If you could go to the modern.gov app, click on the plus sign, the vote should be in progress. Thank you, Chair. That's all votes received and that's unanimously for.
Thank you very much indeed, Mandy. Thank you. I'd now like to move on to item 4, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 5, questions by the public.
None received.
Thank you very much. And item 6, questions by councillors.
None received.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to move on to item number 7. And this is the JAC 2013 Managing the Risk of Fraud and Corruption Annual Report 2021. And I will now invite John Snell, the Corporate Manager, Internal Audit, to present the report. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, councillors. Excuse me, I seem to be suffering at the moment. Not quite sure why. Perhaps it's the nice weather that we're experiencing. So this report outlines the current arrangements in place across both councils to ensure there is a proactive corporate approach to preventing fraud and corruption, and also provides details of the proactive work undertaken during the year. Whilst it's not primarily a role of internal audit function to detect fraud, it does have a role in providing an independent assurance on the effectiveness of the processes put in place by management to manage the risk of fraud. And obviously, where necessary, we will investigate the causes of fraud and allegations of fraud. The annual audit plan, which I'll talk about in the next paper, has an allowance for internal audit to undertake regularity audits, investigations. This is around the National Fraud Initiative related work and proactive anti-fraud and corruption work. The number of days allocated, in my opinion, is deemed to be proportionate to the identified risk of fraud within the councils and is supported by senior management. The planning process is further supported through the Fraud Risk Register, which contains a list of areas where we, myself and the corporate managers, believe that the councils could be susceptible to fraud. The register also helps managers focus on the suitable internal controls to mitigate any subsequent risk. To provide some context around general fraudulent activity in local government, CITFA produce annual national statistics based on return surveys, which we are part of, which indicate the total value of fraud identified and prevented during 2019-20, and it was deemed to be approximately about 240 million. The report shows that council tax continued to be the largest area of identified fraud for councils, with more than 30,000 cases totaling 36 million during 2019-20. The two highest perceived fraud risk areas for last year, 19-20, are again procurement and council tax single persons discount. Part of our work includes raising awareness across the councils and includes examples such as alerting staff of national fraud bulletins and ensuring that the related internal controls are present and operating effectively. Subscription to the National Anti-Fraud Network, which provides proactive intelligence of potential fraud and error risks. The councils, through the Shared Revenues Partnership, continue to give out a strong message about fraud in both publicly issued and internal documents regarding council tax and housing benefit claim forms. Fair processing notices, which inform the public that we will use their data for the prevention and detection of crime, have been updated as part of the General Data Protection Regulations. We also have attended the Organised Fraud and Intelligence Group webinar, which took place in February this year, to alert the councils to fraud trends nationally, and attending CITFA internal fraud webinars in March again this year to explore and further strengthen internal controls to mitigate fraud. Both councils, both councils are committed to being open and transparent, and the Communities and Local Authorities Code of Recommended Practice for Local Authorities on Data Transparency has set out publishing requirements on local authorities, and this includes publishing information on each council's counter-fraud work. To help fight fraud and corruption locally across Suffolk, we've nominated a representative to sit on the Suffolk Counter-Fraud Group. It's intended to hold its meetings normally about 3 to 4 months, although obviously that's been slightly scuppered by COVID-19, but they have regular contact with one another across Suffolk, and their main objectives are set out in this report. The council's Shared Revenues Partnership continued to perform extremely well, and the team have been recognised by the Department for Working Pensions for their work to reduce fraud and error in housing benefit payments. In processing what's termed as Verify Earnings and Pensions, VEP alerts, the partnership authorities are amongst the top performing in the country, with performance rates of just over 98% for Baber and almost 97% for Mid-Suffolk during 18-19. The team have also been thanked by the DWP for their continuous efforts in tackling fraud and error across the districts, and also being asked to work with them to develop best practice, which is really encouraging. Internal audit continued to take a leading role in the National Fraud Initiative, and work has started on investigating identified matches for the latest exercise. Work on housing investigations. These are detailed in paragraphs 3.25 to 3.27 for further information. Sadly, fraudsters are exploiting the COVID-19 pandemic in order to carry out fraud and cybercrime. And in response, we've issued alerts to our residents to help minimise the risk of becoming a victim of such frauds and cybercrime. As you know, the government is providing grant funding through local authorities to support businesses, and a member of the internal audit team is supporting the business cell to provide a level of assurance that funds are only paid to eligible businesses and ensuring that appropriate action is taken to recover any funds that are being paid out fraudulently or in error. The auditor will continue to focus on the end-to-end process of the business grants funding from receipt of application to issue of payment and any post-event assurance undertaken. This work will continue while the grants are available. In terms of what we found to date, only one grant application has been paid in error, and that happened within Baber District Council. Officers sought immediate legal advice from Shared Legal Services, and after some investigation was reported to Action Fraud and the National Anti-Fraud Network. Through networking with other local authorities, it was identified that another council had received the same fraudulent application. So it just goes to show in terms of collaboration and working and networking how benefit that can be across the country as a whole. No other frauds have been identified. However, the recent NFI data matching exercise may identify organised national fraudulent activities, and we'll keep a watchful eye on that. In terms of looking ahead and against, again, a backdrop of reduced fundings, we need to assess fraud risks effectively and target resources where they'll produce most benefit. Excuse me again. We obviously need to remain particularly alert to the threat of fraud as a result of the COVID-19 impact, which I've sort of touched upon earlier. Are there any questions to this part of the fraud, this report, please?
Thank you very much, John. Can I ask members, do any members have any questions for John Snell, please? Thank you. Councillor McLaren, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I feel sorry asking John any questions because he sounds as if he's struggling a bit, but I've got two questions, John.
Yeah,
First of all, I want to say how comprehensive I thought the report was and found it very interesting. But I just want to refer to page 13, 3.12 about the Suffolk Counter Fraud Group. Presumably that is an officer that is the representative on the group from our councils.
That's correct, Councillor,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Do we as a group get any reports from that particular group?
Not at this stage, no, Councillor. It's relatively new as a group. They have met a few times. Obviously, COVID-19 has had an impact in terms of how regularly they do meet. But the benefit that we gain is actually sharing knowledge right across Suffolk. So as I said, each authority has a nominated member. We share information, what's coming up. We help one another, particularly we're working closely with Ipswich Borough, and that's around the SRP stuff, but also the COVID-19 business payments. So we've been working very closely with them and sharing information, which has proved beneficial to both parties. But it's also about sharing in best practice what each authority is doing and whether we can beg, steal or borrow from others, and likewise they can do the same from us. But it's a very useful forum to meet, share ideas, and particularly how to move this forward, so we can actually be far more proactive than we have been in the past.
Thank you. And can I ask you another question?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. 3.26, where you're giving the scale of the incidents. Given that the majority perhaps of fraud might come within the housing remit, and tenant services team are obviously the ones who investigate that, do they have enough resources given the enormous workload they've had over the past year do they have the resources to actually undertake those investigations? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, it's a good question in the current climate. Obviously, the pandemic has caused a number of issues because in terms of protecting not only the tenants but also staff from actually entering into the homes themselves. So talking to the housing managers, I think there's a sense that they do have enough staff at the moment, but in terms of identifying potential fraudulent activity by a tenant, obviously it's made it quite difficult because of the pandemic, but we are remaining, or they are remaining, quite vigilant and investigating. The resources, I think, are okay. They've not suggested to me at any stage that they're being overwhelmed with particular fraudulent activity in terms of tenancy fraud, whether they're subletting or they're not using the home as the principal home, if you like. So I haven't got any sense that they're being overwhelmed with the work, but nevertheless, they do remain very vigilant.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor McLaren. Thank you, John, for that answer. We now have Councillor Matheson, please.
Thank you, Chair. In light of Councillor McLaren's question there about the Suffolk group, should we perhaps add that to our forward plan at some point? I think presumably if something comes to light within our two councils, we'll hear about it anyway, but it might be of interest at some point to pick up any particular frauds, or, you know, for members to hear about any particular frauds that are taking place in other parts of the county.
I mean, yes, certainly, council is something we can do. As I said, normally I would report annually to this council in terms of fraud. If I, from a personal point of view, if I felt that there was some issues, particularly for Baber and Mid Suffolk, that needed to be addressed, and I felt that we didn't have the resources, then that would be something that obviously I would be talking to Emily and also Catherine as a Section 151 officer in terms of obviously the responsibility she has. At this stage, as I said, it's not something that I would normally bring back ad hoc other than through the annual report, but if councillors felt, and I suppose if I felt that there was sufficient concern in terms of the resources available to me to undertake fraudulent work, then perhaps then I could come back to both chairs and seek their advice at an initial stage.
Yeah, I was only thinking in terms of maybe a paragraph specifically about that in the annual fraud report. Okay. Unless obviously there's something absolutely red hot comes up, in which case we'd want to hear about it. Thank you.
Yep, certainly, Councillor, I can do that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Councillor Matheson. Do any other members have any questions for Councillor McCraw, please?
Thank you, Chair. I keep trying to find this paragraph. John, during your report, you mentioned some performance figures for Baber and Mid Suffolk around the level of 98 and 97%. I wonder, I think looking in the report, I can see in 315 performance rates of 99.5% for Baber and 100% for Mid Suffolk. Is there some disparity there, or am I looking at different figures here?
Let's have a look. Sorry, Councillor.
315 has 99.5 and 100.
Yeah, you're quite right. Well spotted. Yeah, I think the actual figures, I think I'm aware of this now. I had some revised figures from SRP, and I think the figures in paragraph 318. Sorry, 315. So those figures are correct. The 315 figures are correct.
But they are in fact for 2019-20, so they could be regarded as requiring updating.
Yes, yeah, certainly, Councillor.
The other point I noted, looking at the total value of claims for housing benefit and other points where there's been overpayment, and looking at the number of cases and the total impact, this, I just ask you to confirm this. It would appear to me that the actual amounts involved in individual cases would be in a range of perhaps less than £100 up to less than £200 each case. I mean,
Yeah.
they are, relatively speaking, small amounts.
Small amounts, yes.
Which could, in fact, be simple error on behalf of a system. You know, it's not as though there's the average size of any of these is large.
No, that's correct. That's correct, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McCraw. Do any other members of this committee have any further questions for John Snell, please? No? If not, are there any other questions from other members present whose members are not actually members of this committee, please? No? Then I will then open the item up for debate. Please use the raised hand function if you wish to raise something during debate. Are there any members that wish to debate this item? Can't see any hands. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. The recommendation is that the contents of this report detailing the progress made and ensuring there are effective arrangements and measures in place across both councils to minimise the risk of fraud and corruption be noted. So there's no actual vote on this one. So thank you, John, for that report. I'd therefore like to move on to agenda item number 8, the internal audit plan for 21-22. And can I now please invite John Snell, the Corporate Manager for Internal Audit, to present his report for this, please. Thank you, John.
Again, thank you, Chair. Excuse me. The purpose of this report is to provide members with details of the audit plan for next year, the scope of those audits to be undertaken, and the corporate activities that will be supported through the work of the team as we move forward. The plan has been developed to ensure it delivers against the public sector internal audit standards in that it covers the following activities: governance processes, ethical issues around accountability, integrity, honesty, information technology governance, how the IT infrastructure supports, enables us as an organisation to achieve its priorities, and risk management and fraud management, which, as I say, we've just touched upon in the previous report. The planning process also recognises that the councils are still striving to improve services and use innovative approaches in delivering services against a backdrop of reducing funds, and therefore have directed resources using a risk-based approach to maximise the effectiveness of internal control. The construction of the audit plan has been developed to support both the annual governance statement, which will come later in the year, and the council's key strategic themes. In developing the plan, we've assessed the following areas, which include review of each council's strategic priorities contained in the corporate plan and those outcomes that support them. The significant and operational risk registers, including any specific COVID-19 related risks identified. Engagement with senior management to identify management's view of the coming year's risks related to the corporate plan and delivery programs, about which assurance is required, and consideration of the 2021-22 budget to evaluate levels of income and expenditure, value of assets, volume of transactions, etc. Interest to internal audit, that's around about the level of past audit opinions, recommendations made that were implemented, fraud risks, values and the complexities around transactions, etc. And also around the control assurance in respect of the 3 lines of defence, which is around sound management of frontline operations, oversight of management activity within professional framework, and external review by internal assurance providers. The audit plan will continue to be resourced from existing staff and from an external audit partner. This arrangement still allows a direct internal provision plus the commission of external skills and capacity, and provides a blend of resources from within the councils and from an external partner of services. The COVID-19 emergency and management directive to reprioritise work during this last quarter has had a significant impact on the internal audit resources and its ability to deliver normal internal audits during this year. As a result, I've agreed with management to defer a number of audits into this year's plan, so you will see that they've been brought forward. These will be reported in more detail in my annual internal audit report 2021 later in the year. The 534 audit days work proposed in the plan is structured to reflect the audit disciplines undertaken to support delivery of the governance and professional framework. The resources committed to each category is annotated and detailed in the plan Annex A and also summarised within Appendix. The intention is that as far as possible, the proposed audits within the plan will be undertaken. However, it's recognised that the plan needs to be flexible to respond to changing circumstances or new emerging risks, and therefore it's best to say that this is a statement of intent in terms of the plan that's presented here. The plan as presented at Annex A represents my current view of how resources can be most effectively used. Where significant deviations to the plan are required, then these will be reported back to this committee as appropriate. I'm therefore satisfied that the level and the mix of resources together with the areas covered in the audit plan will enable me to provide an annual internal audit opinion at year end. And there are no additional audit-related issues currently, I think, that probably need to be brought to the attention of this morning's meeting. So I'm, again, happy to take questions on the report.
Thank you very much, John. Do any members have any questions for John on this report? Thank you. Councillor McLaren, please, and then Councillor Matheson.
Oh dear. Sorry, having a bit difficult with the technology. In relation to, John, in relation to page 26, 4.31, you act as the Deputy Monitoring Officer?
That's correct.
Yeah. Looking at the days that you've allocated for that, given that the Monitoring Officer, I think, has put a lot of effort into a lot of meetings recently. I've been aware of the very large input she's had. Do you think that 49 days is sufficient to support the Monitoring Officer?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Councillor. I think so. I mean, obviously, I discussed this with Emily as the Council's Monitoring Officer. I'm a Deputy Monitoring Officer. There's also another Deputy Monitoring Officer. There's effectively three of us, although the bulk of the work will be carried out by Emily. She will delegate work as she sees fit to myself and my colleagues. So I think in terms of resources, I think we're fairly resilient in terms of undertaking this work.
Yeah, thank you. And I've just one more question, John.
Yeah, certainly.
I'm sorry, my question's come in twos. In relation to page 29 about the proposed audit plan, last year I was concerned, I think it was last year, I was concerned about part of the procurement process. We felt there wasn't enough monitoring of contracts. Yeah. Do you think that you've addressed that now in this proposed internal audit plan?
Yes, certainly, and I remember your question from past councillors. So this is an area that we had hoped to undertake the work for during this year, but as a result of the East of England LGA's report, we were waiting for that. That didn't come through, and obviously Melissa's on here as well, so she can correct me if I got the dates wrong. But that report didn't come in until quite late. Again, that was subject to the pandemic and the issues surrounding that. So I've spoken to Melissa when I was building up and developing the plan, and we agreed that we would carry forward those numbers of days. I think it's about 25 days. Over to this year in terms of procurement. It is an important area, and what we're hoping to do is having a look at this external report, look at what recommendations are coming out. There will be a period of embedment, clearly, but we will almost do then a health check against those recommendations sometime next year, and that will be, in terms of timing, that will be agreed with Melissa and her team.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Councillor Matheson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, regarding the monitoring officer deputy role, Are you liaising with the monitoring officer and the other deputy so that we don't find ourselves ever in the situation where there is not one monitoring officer available? I realise that's less of a problem now that Emily is not on maternity leave, but there was a particularly uncomfortable situation that did arise 18 months or something ago now, just to get reassurance that that's actually being, I think it was all to do with Fridays in particular.
Yeah, thank you. Both myself and the other deputy monitoring officer and Emily, both myself and Jan, who's the deputy monitoring officer, we report to Emily, and any leave that's required has to be authorised by Emily. And so we always ensure that we will have, barring sickness, etc., that we will have sufficient resources available 5 days a week. So there should not be any occasion where a member of the public or a councillor can't get hold of either Emily, myself, or my colleague, the other deputy monitoring officer. So we have coverage 5 days a week.
Thank you.
May I have another, Chair?
Yes, sure, Councillor Matheson.
Yeah, you'll remember I have asked before about this, a certain anxiety about the internal audit staffing arrangement, accepting that the external resource is particularly of value, that you as you said. Could you just run us through what staffing we've actually got on the payroll, so to speak, at the moment?
Yeah, we have two FTEs. That's myself and a colleague who's full time, and the other is supported by the external provider.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I just bring in Emily Yule, please? You had your hand raised, Emily, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come in to support John's answer to the question around coverage for the monitoring officer, and just to confirm that as John has described, we do organise leave and coordinate leave to ensure that in most cases there is always a monitoring officer or a deputy available to answer any queries. If on the very rare occasion it does so happen that we all need to take leave on the same day, the executive assistance team always has an emergency contact number for us. So if there is a very urgent query and somebody's not in the office, we can always be contacted. So I just wanted to provide that reassurance that there would always be coverage for urgent queries, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you. Can I move on to Councillor Hurren, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. John, I was intrigued by sort of item 5, on the workload. There's something about making sure people do the right things in the right way at the right time and for the right reasons.
Page number?
22, 5 at the top. Is this led by you, John, or are you called in if management think something needs doing in a certain place? I just wonder if you expand on how this is led, and it just strikes me you would need a colossal amount of expertise, and you probably have got that, John, but with so many departments across the whole council, I was just intrigued how you sort of go about doing that. And just a supplementary question, I see you've got planning enforcement, but you haven't got planning on the workload, and I just wondered why.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor. There is a sort of fairly robust process in developing the audit plan, and much of that is centred around having conversations, particularly with senior management and also peers, corporate managers like myself. And part of that process is to have those individual conversations with them and go through the areas of concern that they may have, or as I sort of alluded to, looking at the significant risk registers, the operational registers, and having a sort of a really quite candid conversation. I think we have a very good relationship internal audit with management in terms of that they're quite happy to share their concerns with me. We're not, as many years ago, we're not deemed to be the police, come knocking at your door. We're very much here to work alongside with management to provide more efficient services. And so therefore, we can have these very meaningful conversations as we develop the audit plan. So as you can appreciate, we've got scarce resources, so I have to do a risk-based assessment on the areas that we want to have a look at. As much as I'd like to cover everything, I don't obviously have those resources. So it is a risk-based approach. Management also have responsibility for ensuring that their areas of service delivery have robust controls. If they feel that they need internal audits in sight, they will come knocking at my door, and subject to obviously availability and the risks associated with the concern they may have, then that's where I've sort of referred to that plan becomes very flexible. So there might be new risks emerging that I have to drop off some audits because in terms of the scoring, it's of a less of a risk. And during the year, I set the plan at the beginning of the year, but as we sort of progress through the year, those risks might change. And therefore, I have to take a reflective look in terms of, is it still relevant to undertake that audit? And then that comes through conversations again with management. So it's a fairly robust process that we go through in developing that plan, but with the caveat that it does obviously need to remain very flexible as we address risks. And sorry, there was a second part to your question, wasn't there, sort of, Councillor?
Yes, I just wondered, you've got planning enforcement, not planning. Yeah. Then just a supplementary, John, I presume you would flag up staff shortages in one department or one area that you were concerned about as well, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So much of the work that we tend to do is holistic. So there are numbers. So yes, we would focus on the key controls within service areas, but there's also the IT issues. There's also about the data, the quality of the data once it's input and the output. So it's a whole host of areas that we would look at rather one specific area within a service. Hopefully that answers your question, Councillor.
Yeah, and planning?
Planning, well, I've spoken to obviously Tom. I've also spoken to Phil Isbell at the moment, and it was actually Phil, having had those conversations, that wanted some work around planning enforcement. That's where he had concerns. Not, let's say, general concerns. He wanted us to have a look at that. In fairness, we haven't looked at planning enforcement for a long time. So what we're trying to do in there is looking at the resources, how their work is monitored, how it's distributed, and how it's prioritised. So there's some of the sort of areas that we would want to look at and explore further with Phil and the enforcement team as well.
Okay, John, thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hurren. Councillor Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just pleased to see item it's page 28, I believe, item 5.5. Work on the environment priority focuses on carrying out a health check against the carbon reduction management plan. What does that entail, please?
So just bear with me, Councillor. Please scroll down to, is it page 28?
Yes, it is page 28. Yeah.
Sorry, yes, Councillor. So, yeah, there to provide an objective assurance to management and members that the key risks are being managed effectively in accordance with the internal and external obligations. So, my understanding, having talking to Cassandra, the Assistant Director, is there is a set of priorities and values that they hope to undertake in terms of an action plan. And the idea is for my team to have a word with Cassandra and her guys and actually do a health check against the action plan to see where we are. whether we're either ahead or behind the ball, and obviously to basically do a RAG status against that action plan to establish exactly where we are and where we need to be in terms of delivering on those action plans.
Okay, so there's no, it's not actually looking at the amount of carbon that the council's currently emitting, and
no, unless it's prescribed actually within that action plan, then no, it's just looking at the action plans that were passed through council and agreed by council that we would actually do that health check against.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lindsay. Do any other members have any questions, please, for John Snell? No. Then I will open up the item for debate, and please could you use the raised hand function, please? Do any members wish to debate this particular item further? Thank you. No. Okay. The recommendation is that the contents of the internal audit report supported by Appendix A be noted. There's no vote on this because A is purely being noted. And I'd like to thank John for all his work on internal audit, and thank you very much for the plans you've presented to us today, John. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Chair.
I'd now like to move on to agenda number 9, JAC/2015 Statement of Accounts and Auditors Report for 2019-20. And I'd now like to invite Rebecca Hewitt, Assistant Manager Financial Accountant, to present the report. Suresh, are you also planning to comment on that? So who would like to go?
Rebecca.
Rebecca first and then Suresh? Yeah, thank you very much. Rebecca, please. Thank you, Rebecca. You're muted, Rebecca.
Sorry.
Right.
I'd like to present to you the report for the Statement of the Accounts 2019-20 and the Auditors Report. This year, the audit is still continuing. We have, I think Suresh has given his audit report in Appendix A, and he will talk about that this morning. In terms of issues that have arisen so far, the only issue that could have an impact on or a financial implication for the council relates to the community infrastructure levy, as highlighted in section 6. For the statements of accounts are attached to Appendix B and Appendix C. So I shall hand over to Suresh.
Thank you, Suresh.
Thank you, Rebecca. Morning to members of the committee. I've got my colleague Vicky Chong as well, who's with me, who's going to be presenting part of this. So let me just give you a bit of an introduction and an overall context, and then we'll go into a bit of detail in terms of some of the items that I'll report in. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
yeah.
Sorry, my screen froze for a second there. So I suppose it's worthwhile just reflecting on the fact that we're coming up to the 31st of March 2021, and obviously the 1920 audit is still in progress, so it'd be useful for me to explain why that is the case. And it's worthwhile just me giving you a bit of national context, because there's probably about 25 to 30% of local authorities up and down the country who are in a similar position, who have yet to publish their audited 1920 account, and I think that's a reflection of how challenging the last 18 months have been for both preparers of local authority accounts as well as auditors, clearly with the impact of COVID-19 on not just the need to kind of work remotely, but also some particular issues that has presented in terms of the account. So you'll see our reference to property valuations in the report, which will obviously give you a bit of detail on, but also our reference to then things like going concern and internal consultations that we've had to do to satisfy ourselves that your disclosures around those particular areas are appropriate. We did originally plan to have the audit completed by January this year. So we did start the audit in November through to December. I think it's fair to say that, again, because of the impact of COVID, the finance team has obviously had priorities in terms of dealing with COVID grants, but also then preparing the budget. And I think the timing of our audit has obviously conflicted with that. So that has contributed to the protracted nature of the audit. And then the other angle is, like I say, particularly around property valuations, which I'm going to ask Vicky to talk about in a second. But if I take you to the executive summary, which starts on page 41 of your pack, I'll just talk you through some of the key messages there. So 41 just reminds you of the levels of materiality that we operate in terms of auditing the statements of the two councils and the two sets of group accounts. Over on page 42, we give you a status of where we were a few weeks ago in terms of the audit. A number of those areas up in that first box are now kind of complete. The key areas of work in progress, as I say, is the valuation of property, plant and equipment, but also the reference to the community infrastructure levy, which Rebecca mentioned, and Vicky will talk to you about that. We've actually completed some of our internal consultation procedures or ongoing concern and valuation uncertainty. So you will see in the auditor's report, whilst we are giving you proposing an unqualified opinion, which is obviously good news, we are including what's called an emphasis of matter paragraph on those valuations, that material uncertainty that your valuer has included in their valuation report. That is not uncommon for 1920, where councils have had significant levels of assets that have been valued using market activity data. Given the volatility of the market as at the 31st of March 2020, most valuers across the country have included a similar material uncertainty paragraph, and as a result, most auditors up and down the country have included that paragraph in their audit report. And I should hasten to add, it's not a qualification, it's not a modification, it's actually just highlighting to the reader of the accounts that you've got that disclosure in your accounts. Over on page 43, we summarise there the current what we call audit differences that we've identified. There are, as you see at the top of the page, some differences which the council is happy not to adjust for, and that relates to the pension liability and what was called the McLeod case, which some of you might or might know about. But in essence, there's a national case around pensions. I think it was to do with gender parity and the impact of that on your pension liabilities. Those two figures there, which obviously are relatively small, and we're content that they don't need to be corrected for. We've mentioned the community infrastructure levy, and Vicky can talk about that in terms of what that means. And in respect to the property valuations, that is likely to lead to differences which, whilst don't impact the bottom line of the council, clearly do have an impact on the balance sheet. Page 44, we just summarise there our work against the risks that we've identified. And whilst I'll say we're still working on the property, plant and equipment, things like the group accounts and now the going concern disclosures are complete, and we're happy with those. Over on page 45, it's useful to highlight that we have made some recommendations for improvement in section 7, which Vicky will touch on. Value for money, we've given you a clean bill of health in respect of any matters to report that we don't have any. And then over on page 46, I refer to some correspondence that we did receive during the year, and I'll talk about that now before coming back to the fees after Vicky's given you an update on the property valuations. But on that correspondence, I've included on page 68 a bit more detail of what we received, what we did, and what we found. Essentially, the correspondence that we received was asking us to look at the legality of how the two councils have financed the acquisition of properties on behalf, well, SIFCO have acquired properties. Particular, there was one particular asset that was referenced in the correspondence. Our focus was on, has the council met the relevant MHCLG and SIPFA requirements around those acquisitions and how you fund those. As you see there, obviously a lot of this is historic in terms of when the SIFCO arrangement was established. We were satisfied that you did receive proper legal and treasury management advice and you followed that. We're also satisfied that you complied with the relevant requirements in respective years in terms of how you have financed those investments and the disclosures that you've made in things like your joint capital investment and treasury management strategies, which the most recent one includes clear disclosure of borrowing in need of advance. So we were satisfied that there was no illegal activity by the council in respect of those transactions and those funding. So I'm sure there'll be questions on that, which I'm happy to pick up in a second. But let me just pass on to Vicky, who will talk you through some of the issues around property valuations.
Thank you, Suresh. Vicky, over to you.
Thank you, Suresh. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to go through the property, plant and equipment valuation significant risk in terms of our work and the findings to date. So I'm going to draw your attention to page 50 to 52. Just to give you some background about this risk, property, plant and equipment is a significant balance in the financial statement, and it requires material judgment and estimation technique to calculate the year-end balances. So a small movement in the assumption used could have a material impact on the value. There has already been an increased focus from regulator on reliance on valuer and the work they do. So as a result, this requires us to have a more thorough considerations of the approach to the audit and more extensive work on obtaining the third-party corroborations for input used by the valuers and also the market data for comparing valuation and their basis. And this is even more so for Baber and Suffolk due to a change of external valuer in 1920, and therefore property valuation, including investment property for Baber, has been identified as a significant risk as set out in our audit plan back in July. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemic also triggered a material uncertainty surrounding property valuation, which we also need to consider. So in order to address the risk, we have performed a number of procedures, and these are set out in page 50. Some of the additional procedures that we have performed, including that we consider the adequacy and scope of the work performed by the external valuer. We engage EY Real Estate as our internal specialist to review the assumptions and methodology used by the valuer. We also consider the impact of any material uncertainty relating to COVID-19 on all audit reports. So in terms of the sample size, on the general fund property asset, we selected a sample of 28 items for Baber and 29 for Miss Suffolk for testing purpose. We also selected to test a sample of 136 for Baber and 103 for Miss Suffolk on council dwellings. The work is still in progress, as Suresh just mentioned, but on the sample size portions that was reviewed by EY Real Estate, we have already found a number of issues which we have set out in page 51. Some of the issues include, for Baber, 4 asset valuation fell outside the expected range and were potentially overstated, including the Boreham Gate Shopping Centre. For Mid Suffolk, the initial findings show that the external valuer did not have the complete or updated information to carry out the valuations, such as different site plan for use in 2 leisure centres, which do not reflect the undeveloped land that are associated with the site. The valuer was not made aware of the part change of use in the former Audit site, and also on the 4-year site, the valuer formed the evaluation based on estimated gross income without making any allowance for operating expenses. So our further inquiries have also found that although this was the first year of the council engagement of his valuation specialist, Wills, Head and Eve, the valuer would not provide all the relevant information during the evaluation exercise. Instead, they were provided with the prior year valuation information from the former valuer. So in our view, this is a weakness in the valuation approach for 1920, for which we have included our recommendation in section 7, which is in page 71. So from an audit perspective, this initial finding potentially could be a significant issue, as we need to consider whether it also impacts on the rest of the asset populations that were valued. So to give us the assurance that the issue is not pervasive across the general fund portfolio, we have extended our testing criteria and have asked for additional information for the remaining sample size to confirm that the correct site plan were used and the information on any actual plan change in use of assets were provided to the valuer. We are currently still completing this additional testing. And at the time of writing this report, management have already obtained from the external valuer the revised valuations for Boreham Shopping Centre and the Mid Suffolk Leisure Centre. I wanted to update that we have now also received the revised version for other properties, including the Stradbroke Leisure Centre, former Audit site, and the foyer. These revised valuations are being reviewed and considered by UI Real Estate currently. So once we have completed our procedures, we will need to follow our consultation process relating to the material uncertainty that were arising from COVID-19 and our planned emphasis of matter in our audit reports. Regarding to council dwelling, we also engaged UI Real Estate to review the work. Subject to the final review, the work has been completed by UI Real Estate with no matters to report. Our work on the residual samples of council dwelling is still in progress, and we will report our finding when the work is complete. So I also wanted to flag the additional audit time and fees. So due to the numbers of issues that we have found, our audit inputs in terms of resources have been significantly higher than what we initially planned for, including the inputs from UI Real Estate. We have therefore included an estimate of the additional fee in Section 8, which will be covered by Suresh later. I will also like to draw your attention to audit differences that we have identified to date in page 63, which are the accounting treatment for community infrastructure levy in both council accounts and the exit packages note in Mid Suffolk accounts. So with regard to the community infrastructure levy, the code requires any unspent charges to be recognised in the capital grants unapplied account. And also, where the council acts as a collecting agent for parishes, the unpaid amount should be recognised in creditors. However, the council have incorrectly recognised this amount or in earmarked reserves. The error is historic, that dating back to 1718, and we are currently waiting for the council supporting working papers to outline the proposed adjustment. As for the exit packages on Mid Suffolk account, we found a disclosure error where the redundancy cost and the numbers of employees were not correctly stated. Because the disclosure relates to sensitive information, we have also included a recommendation in Section 7, which are in page 71. Where we have identified scope of, for improvement in the 3 areas that I have just mentioned: property valuations, community infrastructure levy, and exit packages.
So then, just quickly then, on the fees, as Vicky's just mentioned, we've included on page 74 and 75 our current position in terms of the additional areas of work that we've had to incur, with a range, I think, for the work on property valuations, given that is still in progress. So it's finally, then, our plan at the moment is that we hope to be able to complete all the work, with the exception of the property valuations, by the end of April. And the reason why I say with the exception of property valuations is because that is dependent on how quickly we get responses back from further inquiries that I'm sure our EY real estate specialist will have. If that is, imminent and there's that quick turnaround, then clearly we will hope to try and wrap everything up by the end of April. But I suspect it will probably go into May in terms of those valuation issues. But clearly we'll work as quick as we can to get the audit completed and your accounts signed off. We'll stop there, Chair. We're happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Suresh, and also to Vicky. Do any members have any questions, please? Councillor Lindsay, please, first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I suppose I've got 2 questions. One is just this property errors and the sampling you did. What concerns me is I don't think you look at the valuations under the CIFCO, and I just wonder if we've got these errors in the properties we hold, kind of as Baber and as Mid Suffolk, we're going to find the same areas in valuations of properties that we bought under CIFCO, and if so, how do we check whether that's the case? And the second question was, you know, it's great that you've picked this up. I suppose the obvious question is, you know, but it's cost us a lot of money for you to investigate it. So perhaps unfair question, but why didn't you pick it up before? Thanks.
Okay. I think in terms of the CIFCO question, I think we've probably been asked this before about what, you know, the procedures we carry out on CIFCO. Clearly, CIFCO is consolidated into your group accounts, and we place reliance upon the auditor of CIFCO in terms of the work they do on asset valuation. I'm not sure if they use the same valuer or if it's the same approach in terms of valuations, but obviously we've been testing the authorities' valuations, and we have reviewed the work of the auditor at CIFCO. And you know, we haven't identified any particular issues around the valuations of those assets, but we wouldn't have done the same level of testing. That is a fair point, but we wouldn't expect to either. In terms of the property valuations work, so obviously this is the first year of your new valuation arrangement, so the basis that they value is different to the basis of valuation, particularly around assumptions, than that your prior valuer has adopted. The key issue is the information that your current valuer has used to inform those valuations, and as Vicky had said, they were using the previous year's data, and obviously things have moved on around some of those assets. So that's the reason why we wouldn't have picked that up in the prior year. It's also worth saying that the valuations of property assets at local authorities is a big area of focus for the kind of regulators of auditors, and you're not uncommon as an authority to have issues with the valuations of your assets. Quite a lot of the reasons why there's only still, like I say, 25-30% of councils that still need to publish their 1920 accounts audited is because of valuation issues. It is an area of focus for auditors each year. We're required to do even more than we have done in the past.
So sorry, if I could just check what you just said, make sure I've understood it. The reason it wasn't picked up before is because it's only that last year that we changed the valuer. And
you got a new valuer for 1920, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lindsay. Councillor Matheson, please.
Yeah, I've got 2 or 3 questions, but just staying with where we are at the moment, so to speak. So this might be a question for our own officers. Who decided to change the valuer, and what was the reasons?
I think that is a question for officers, Chair.
I think it is.
Is that one for Catherine or for Rebecca or Melissa, please?
Chair, I'll try and answer initially, but Melissa may want to come in. It obviously was before Rebecca joined us, so it wouldn't be fair to put Rebecca on the spot in terms of that question. We felt it was time for a change in terms of having the valuer. It's the very small organisation. We previously used the district valuer, and we found they weren't a big enough organisation to actually undertake our work when we needed it to be done, and were not always responsive in terms of us needing additional information from them. So they often had an impact on our timetable in terms of closing the accounts and being able to meet our statutory deadlines to achieve the closure of accounts. So we made the decision to test the market and to look at changing our valuers for this year's accounts. I'll just pause there in case Melissa wanted to add anything on top of that.
No, totally agree with that. Thanks, Catherine.
Yeah, if I could continue with that thread first, Chair. I think and this is perhaps more back for Suresh. Obviously, with the protracted delays and so on, which we, to some extent understand. Although I must say, from what you said, we are in the bottom quarter of the performance of councils then, alas. But what I was wondering about really was that whether we should somehow be focusing rather more on getting good valuations and getting everything right, because the year ends on Wednesday. the year 2021 ends on Wednesday this week, you know, are we going to have ironed out all the difficulties you've been outlining, or both of you have been outlining with the valuation side, so that it all comes out smoothly and reliable, etc., etc., for 2021?
So I think maybe Catherine can update, on what you're doing for this current year. But from our perspective, obviously, I think this has been good learning, I suspect, for the council in terms of the issues that we've identified. And I know there's been a lot of work done already with your value and the information that they've now got. So you know, I think we've made a recommendation. I think the finance team have accepted that and are taking action to make improvements.
Thank you so much. Catherine, would you like to come in there, please?
Yeah, if I could just add to that, Chair. Obviously, you're just hearing about this at the committee today, but we've been working with the auditors for a number of weeks now around the issues around the PPE valuations. So, you know, we've had time to think about what we need to do differently towards the 2021 accounts, and definitely it's been valuable learning that we'll put into practice for the valuations for the current financial year.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Matheson, do you have a further question, please?
Yeah, it was quite a different point though. On the, I mean, it may just be that this is what the government says, end of story. But on the community infrastructure levy, the 5% for administration, or should I say up to 5% for administration. What's worrying me is actually that the cost that the administration work is substantially lags behind the collecting of the money, and we've now built up, you know, a large pile of money actually, and we're waiting for various infrastructure providers to bid for that. And all right, we paid out a few million now, but if the 5% is at the time that the money is being collected, that's not when we're going to need to spend the money on the administration. So is there no way of actually putting that into a reserve or something for the, you know, because I you know, having had some involvement in it, there is a lot of work down the way once we've actually received a bid, and that's a long time after when the 5% was not needed, if you see what I mean. Because, you know, where you've said we've taken 5% and we should have taken less than that because we didn't spend so much. Do you see the point I'm looking for there?
Catherine, is that one that you could answer possibly, please?
I'll try to, Chair. I think probably the point here is that Christine Thurlow's team is obviously the team that does administer the SIL on behalf of the two councils. She has a team and their costs. And I think the point is, Councillor Matheson, that probably if Christine finds that she doesn't have enough support within her team, then she would obviously, you know, talk within the council to see if more resource could be provided. If you're suggesting, you know, that there will be higher demands in future, and if that is still within the 5% of the SIL that we're collecting in that particular year, then yes, we could use the 5% to support that. Not sure if that entirely answers your question, but does that help in some way?
Well, yeah, up to a point. I mean, I'm conscious of the fact that government tend to change these schemes all the while. All right, it's perhaps not quite as vulnerable as something like the new homes bonus, but they do change these things and they change the rules and so on. And I'm just wondering that if we you know, only spend 2% instead of 5%, and then put the rest of the money into the pot and decide to spend it, then we might actually then finish up with a substantial extra cost later on in as I said, spending the money, so to speak. Yeah, it's just recognizing that the rules don't seem to actually reflect how the thing is really working. That's all. But we maybe leave it there. There seems to me there's a bit of an issue.
Thank you, Councillor Matheson. Thank you, Catherine. Councillor McCraw, please.
Thank you.
You're muted,
on mute.
Councillor McCraw.
Start again.
You're muted.
Yep.
Oh, that's better. Thank you.
It's a delay. I have no idea why this should happen, but that's the way it is. Actually, I think I'd like to address the SIL question because the SIL accounting changes necessary would seem to me to apply from the fact that we start off with the 5% as a basic assumption, for that will be the cost of administering SIL, and then as has been referred to historically, it emerges that in fact in this instance the cost has been less than the assumed 5%, and inevitably, because you can't know in advance, that's where this modification and the accounting impact comes in. But what I'd like to ask about is from page 34, where the impact is first mentioned by Rebecca, and then Vicky on page 63, these adjustments being historical, can I ask where they would be applied in correcting the accounts, and what the potential impacts would be on future budgets or the existing budget, or would we be looking at previous years?
Thank you. Would that be one for Catherine to answer, please, or Rebecca?
I think this one might be one for Rebecca or Melissa to answer. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Thank you. Melissa, would you like to take that one, or Rebecca? Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I can have a go at this one. We have had to go back to previous years to look at the figures for SIL. So there will be some financial implications that's still being worked through. It may be that Sue can provide us a short update of where that is, but that we have had to go back to sort of 2016, 17, I think, to look at that. I don't know if you're able to update, Sue.
Thank you. Yes, we are working through the figures, and the fact that we've had to go back a couple of years has obviously meant quite a bit of work and detailed work to do. We are getting to the point where we've analysed what should have happened, and we're looking at what has happened so that we can then work out what the differences are and to work out what the adjustments are to the statements and the figures in the general ledger. So we're nearly there, but not quite.
Thank you, Sue.
Can I just take a follow-up? Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Kath.
sure.
I was just going to add to that. I mean, in terms of adjustment for Baber, we'll likely have to look at the transformation fund balance to do the adjustment with, and probably similarly with Mid Suffolk, it will be through the growth and efficiency fund. But we'll sort of make that decision once we know what the final figures are looking like.
Well, my follow-up question was, would we be expecting any impact on the budgets that we've just passed this year for the 2021 to 22 period?
Yeah, I've asked that question myself because that popped into my head when the issue arose, and I believe that we have set the budget for 21-22 in the right way, so that it shouldn't be an impact for the coming year.
Possibly 22 to 23.
I was going to say we will look at it now each year, and apply the right methodology to the budgets moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Councillor McLaren, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, I just want some clarification of what Vicky said, and then I can ask the question after that. So just confirm what you said, Vicky, in your report about the SIL payments. What was it you actually said about the payments to parishes? Did you say it was late or it hadn't happened?
No, thank you for the questions. So the seal charges that paying to the parishes is basically the council actually acting to collect this money for the parishes as well. So not just for themselves. So for any payments that that needs to pass on to the parishes, the council actually will receive those income and then hold them in the account and pay them, in the due course when the development commences. So that's how it should work. So therefore, for this portion of the money, it should be recognised as a creditors because.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Councillor Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to return to the property valuations and CIFCO, perhaps I could ask the officers, because Suresh didn't know who the valuer was at CIFCO and if it was the same as the valuer we have for our main properties. So, first question is for the officers: is the valuer the same for CIFCO? The second question is, who is the auditor for CIFCO? And the third question is, are the officers satisfied that that the audit that we're getting of CIFCO is picking up, is accurate, and that there isn't a similar problem in CIFCO? And or do we need to ask our auditors to do a similar exercise to what Ernst & Young have done? Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't believe the valuer is the same valuer that we use for the council's main accounts. We think it might be Frank Knight that is used, but obviously CIFCO is a joint venture, so it has its own board, and the board are the people who appoint both the valuers and the auditors for CIFCO. So say that's got its own arrangements. I believe that Ensors are the auditors for the accounts for CIFCO. So say they are appointed independently by the board of CIFCO. So they would obviously be having their own conversations. Obviously, Ensors also have to do a report to the CIFCO board on their accounts. I'm not quite sure of the timing of that and when that is discussed, but obviously that would be available once that audit has been completed and the accounts submitted at Companies House. It might be a conversation to have with Emily Atack, who's obviously sits on the board of CIFCO, if you wanted further information about those arrangements.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Lindsay, did you want a supplementary question, please?
Well, it's perhaps one for us as a committee, but do we want to write to the board of CIFCO and make them aware of the issues we have with our own valuations here?
Okay, thank you. Catherine, I think whether that might be useful, I think, to satisfy members of this committee, if we could have a report from Emily Atack for future reference.
Yep, I'm happy to speak to Emily and find out where they're at with their audit of the accounts and whether they had similar issues or not. And yes, I can circulate that back to the members of the committee.
That'd be very much appreciated. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Councillor Lindsay, for your question. Suresh, did you want to come back, please?
Yeah, just to sort of follow up on that point, I think it's worthwhile just being clear. So I totally accept it's a valid question to ask about, the appropriateness of valuations in CIFCO, but the way you consolidate CIFCO into your group accounts, which is what you've got in front of you, means that those valuations really are, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but you don't bring the assets onto your group accounts. They're basically not part of the consolidation. If there's any movement in those valuations, that might feed through, but the actual value of those assets doesn't sit in your group accounts.
Thank you, Suresh. Councillor McCraw, please.
I'm not sure my microphone is on.
It is.
Oh, good. It's not showing. Whether that might be beyond the remit not only of the auditors for the council, but also beyond the remit of this committee. I'm quite happy. Obviously, I've looked at CIFCO quite a lot over the entire years of its operation, and it would seem to me that the questions on the CIFCO accounts should be addressed through CIFCO's meetings or scrutiny of CIFCO, and a separate audit of CIFCO would be something that could be questioned in the CIFCO annual meeting. That's just from a point of view of procedure that I've observed over the years.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. That's quite a good point. Catherine, was there anything you could perhaps add to that at all, please?
So on this occasion, I might need to defer to our monitoring officer on that one, Chair.
Yeah. Thank you. Can I bring in Emily, please, to perhaps comment on that? Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Chair. I was just actually looking at the last annual report of CIFCO to the full council, and can confirm that the auditors and the valuers that Catherine remembered from memory were correct. So that was pretty impressive. Chair, I would just like to make that point that the CIFCO report, in terms of the performance report and the business plan, does come to council on an annual basis. That's normally in July, and that's an opportunity, obviously, for the full council to scrutinise and ask questions around the work of CIFCO. I don't really see a connection in the valuation issue that our auditors have found in respect of the council's assets. I don't see a connection with the assets of CIFCO, but there's no reason why we couldn't share our observations with the board of CIFCO, but I don't see a direct correlation between the two. And indeed, I don't think it would be appropriate in terms of the governance arrangements for CIFCO to ask for additional information to come back to the Joint Audit and Standards Committee, because we already have the scrutiny process established. And as I say, that actually does come to full council, so all councillors can comment on it.
Yeah, really appreciate that, Emily. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Councillor Matheson, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand a little more what Suresh was just saying about CIFCO valuation. I mean, in our consolidated group accounts balance sheet, that is an asset of, or half of it is an asset of Mid Suffolk. So it's the valuation must be in there somewhere.
I might ask Vicky to give you a bit more detail, but in essence, you adopt what's called equity accounting. So you account for your share of the, in effect, the kind of profit and loss of those entities rather than the assets that they hold. Vicky, is there any more you can add?
No, basically that's equity accounting is basically you just recognize the profit and loss in CIFCO accounts. So each Baber and Mid Suffolk would take their share and recognize in your single entity CIES, your comprehensive income and expenditure account.
So, but the balance sheet, I mean, how does that work? Where does the unfortunate at the moment deficit of CIFCO, where does that rest in the group accounts of Mid Suffolk?
Because you recognize that in your single entity CIES. So when you transfer consolidate into your group accounts, it will actually recognize in your reserve. So on the usable reserve in your group balance sheet. I mean, I assume that, you know, Sue or Rebecca probably we can give you a bit more details behind that on the accounting treatment, but it is currently sitting in your group balance sheets under the reserve, usable reserves.
Okay, well, I'd be interested to learn a little bit more about how that actually is done, but perhaps outside this meeting. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. Thank you very much, Vicky. Thank you, Councillor Matheson. Do any other members have any questions at this stage? No. Then I will now open up for debate. Please use the raised hand function for the debate, please. Do any members wish to debate this item? I take that as a no. Okay, then I'd like to move on to the recommendations of paragraphs 3.1 to 3.4 within the report. Recommendations 3.1 and 3.2 are for both councils. Recommendation 3.3 is for Baber councillors only, and recommendation 3.4 is for Mid Suffolk councillors only. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please, for recommendations 3.1 and 3.2, please?
Could we have the page number, Chair, very helpfully?
The page number was probably, hang on, 33, is it? 33, I've got 33 and 34.
Let's have a look at those. Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah. So are you looking to propose, Councillor Matheson? For items 3.1 and 3.2? Councillor McCraw, please.
I'd like to propose motions, recommendations 3.1 and 3.2 for both councils.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Councillor Hurren. Councillor Hurren, I think you're still muted.
My apologies. It didn't
No
seem
problem.
that didn't seem to work. Yes, I will second the aforesaid numbers. Yep.
Thank you very much. I will now ask the governance officer to conduct the electronic vote, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is for recommendations 3.1 and 3.2 of the report. So this is for all members. If you can go to the modern.gov app, open the agenda, go to the plus sign and attendance and voting. This vote should be in progress. Just waiting for a couple more votes. Thank you, Chair. So all the votes are in. That's 8 votes for and 1 against.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Councillor Hurren, did you have a question, please? Your hand's just gone up.
No, sorry, it's an old hand, Chairman.
Okay.
I'll take it down in a moment.
Thank you very much. Right, I'd like to move on to recommendation 3.3, which only Baber councillors can vote on. Can I have a proposer and a seconder for recommendation 3.3, please, from the Baber members, please? Yes, Chair, I'd be willing to recommend that. Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Hurren. And Councillor McCraw, did you have, we're going to second?
I'd like to second that, please.
And Councillor Fraser, was that you were going to second as well, were you?
Yeah, clearly not in faster than the two whippersnappers there.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I ask Mandy to conduct the electronic vote, please, for the Baber members 3.3? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now in progress. Baber members, please. Okay, I think I've received all votes. Yeah, so that would be, oh, sorry, my screen's just frozen. I think that's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mandy. I'd now like to propose the recommendation 3.4 for Mid Suffolk councillors, and I'm happy to propose that. Councillor Matheson, did you wish to second that?
No, I really wanted to understand whether the accounts had actually been completed. If we sound as if we're still dealing with the audit of them, are they in fact complete?
I believe they're still in. being completed. I believe that's the correct Suresh or Catherine, what I read.
So you've obviously issued your draft accounts, which will be need to be updated for the findings that we've been talking about. So we haven't got a final version because they haven't been revised yet.
Yeah, that's how I understood it. Yeah.
Well, frankly, I wouldn't want to vote without qualifying what's written in 3.4. Then if it's not done, it's not done.
Can I help, Chair?
Yes, please, Catherine. Yep.
We're asking for the final sign-off or the final version of the accounts for delegation to myself and the two chairs of the committee. So what the committee is being asked to vote for in 3.3 and 3.4 now for Mid Suffolk is that you approve that we do sign them off once they are completed. So it's that delegation.
Can we actually say that in the recommendation, please? I mean, I don't want to be pedantic or anything, but I mean, let's if that's what we're doing, that we should say that's what we're doing. I mean, we are in some pretty difficult times here, signing off something a year after the event, except that we're signing it off, but it's not actually complete. So, all right, I would be moderately comfortable to delegate accordingly, but let's please say that we're delegating. I'm sorry to delay things, but that's how I feel about it. If anyone else agrees with me on the Mid Suffolk side, well then,
Chair, if I could assist again, looking at the recommendations in the report, 3.1 is asking for the delegation, and then it said that this delegation will include that once complete the Joint External Auditors report, and then again once complete the final accounts. So the 3.2 and the 3.3 for Baber and the 3.4 for Mid Suffolk are what's being included in the delegation.
So you're saying that so they are all. Yeah, I see. Yeah. Yes, I spot the colon there. This will include colon 3.3.
Yeah, that's how I understood the situation. That's how I understood it. Is there anything else? So do you wish to second?
All right. Well, having had that explained, then I will second it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Did Councillor Harron, did you wish to make a comment before we go to the vote on that one? No.
I think it's an old hand, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Right, could I ask the Governance Officer please to conduct the vote on 3.4, please?
Thank you. So Mid Suffolk members, that vote should now be in progress for you. Just waiting for one more vote. Thank you, Chair. That's unanimously for.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Right, therefore, I'd now like to move on to item number 10, which is JAC 20/16, the Complaints Monitoring Report. And I'd now like to invite Emily Yule, the Monitoring Officer, to present the report, please. Over to you, Emily, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to introduce the Code of Conduct Complaints Monitoring Report. Chair, I would just like to apologise for some typos in an earlier version of the report in respect of the dates in the headings of the table. Some incorrect years were printed, but it has been amended now.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is a statistical report detailing the number of Code of Conduct complaints received in the period 1st of November 2020 to 18th of March 2021. I cannot go into the detail of any individual complaints due to the privacy rights of both the complainant and the subject of the complaints. However, I would like to provide the committee with some further contextual background. There has been a particularly high volume of complaints on the Baber side. 55 complaints were received, 10 about district councillors and 45 about town and parish councillors in the period reported. The town and parish council complaints are predominantly related to Long Melford Parish Council and Hadley Town Council. In both cases, there have been particular events that have generated multiple and sometimes reciprocal complaints. I and my team are working closely with these councils to provide support, and I have recently written formally to Hadley Town Council with some recommendations, including that I now attend all full council meetings to deal with any conduct issues at the time they arise. A large number of the complaints continue to relate to comments made on social media, and we are eagerly awaiting the guidance on the new LGA Model Code of Conduct to see if there will be greater powers given to monitoring officers to intervene when social media posts are made from a personal account. 7 complaints about town and parish councillors have been upheld during this period, and recommendations have been made regarding appropriate sanctions. These have included attending training, making a formal apology, and reviewing the policies of the councils involved to give greater clarity to both staff and councillors. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any queries on the report, but would just remind councillors again that I cannot go into the detail of any individual complaints. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Do we have any questions from members for Emily, please? Councillor Hurren, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Emily. Am I correct in thinking that if somebody is complained against, be it district or parish, are they alerted to the fact they are have been complained against, or is it totally kept private?
Chairman, if it depends on the nature of the complaint and the stage at which the complaint gets to. So there will be cases where a complaint doesn't get through initial assessment because it doesn't meet the criteria to be counted as a code of conduct complaint. So in some cases, we wouldn't inform the subject of the complaint because it's not actually a formal code of conduct complaint. It's been dismissed at the initial assessment stage. And in some cases, the complainant has requested anonymity as well. So we wouldn't share those details. But any time that a code of conduct complaint is treated as a formal complaint within the scope of the code of conduct complaints procedure, the councillor is informed, regardless of whether that complaint is then upheld or dismissed after investigation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hurren. Councillor McLaren, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Obviously, the difference between the two councils was very marked, and I'm glad you sort of advised us of where the majority probably were centred. But I've just one question. The complaints against district councillors, I don't know whether I can ask this question or not, are many of the complaints raised by other district councillors, or is it from the general public?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. The source of the complaints is, I would say, fairly split between complaints by other councillors and complaints from members of the public, yes. Albeit obviously that has no impact on how we deal with the complaint. All complainants are treated yes. in the same manner.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Councillor McCraw, please.
It is working. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah,
that's something. It's been a difficult year, to put it mildly, and I suspect that for controversial issues and for tensions running high with a lot of frustration that needs to be vented, it's maybe not too surprising to see an increase in these complaints. That's a comment and it's not a question. So I'll come to the question. On the matter of the social media aspects to this, and I think it's absolutely crucial in the current circumstances. The code of conduct you referred to, Emily, that's going to be produced by the Local Government Association. Am I correct in thinking both councils provided a very clear response to that consultation, pointing out, well, actually, perhaps, Emily, you could run through what the nature of our response was on behalf of both councils regarding social media and its prevalent use.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Emily, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, you're right. The councils both responded to the consultation on the new model code that was developed by the Local Government Association back in the autumn of last year. With regards to social media, the councils were very clear that the code needed to provide greater clarity about acceptable behaviour on social media, and also to tackle this the current presumption in respect of capacity. So when we consider code of conduct complaints, we have to establish capacity, which is essentially the question: was the councillor acting in an official capacity when the behaviour occurred? And in the case of social media, quite often personal social media accounts are used to make comments, and therefore the capacity test is difficult to satisfy. So quite often we find that we're unable to apply the code because we're unable to prove that the comments were made in an official capacity because a personal account has been used. So the consultation response also sought clarity and sort of a firmer position on the presumption of official capacity. Now, those haven't been brought through into the published revised model code of conduct. So a revised code has been published and is available for adoption by councils. But in my view, and also in the view of many other monitoring officers across the country, because there's been no legislative change, the amendments to the new model code are actually quite minor. And therefore we are waiting guidance that is currently being produced for the LGA that will provide further context about how that new model code can be applied. And at that point, I think it would be appropriate for me to then bring that model code to the council and establish whether it's the council's wish to adopt all or parts of the new model code. And of course, Chair, a really important part of that is maintaining our Suffolk-wide local code of conduct. So I am working very closely with monitoring officers at the county and in the other districts and the Borough Council.
Thank you, Emily. Councillor McCraw, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, if I may.
Thank you.
At what point might we see that code of conduct for the use of social media be brought to the council? And are we expecting it to make any points regarding use of social media from the public? I know that's not within our remit or our control, but on the other hand, I think we have a responsibility to try and produce civilized conversations and discourse. And if we don't acknowledge that, we can't expect people to make up their own minds without that guidance.
Chair, there is some discussion or mixed information about when we're expecting to get that guidance. Initial indications were that it would be produced in the latter half of the summer. There's now some suggestion that the LGA have asked that to be brought forward to May so that councils could adopt the revised code at the annual council meetings. However, I think given the time the time of the year that we're already at, and given the challenges of getting something produced and consulted and shared with councillors before the annual council meeting, I think it's very unlikely that Baber and Mid Suffolk councils would be looking at it at the annual council meetings. So I'd expect it to come to council maybe July or September, realistically. Just in regard to the query around public use of social media, there is no way that the Code of Conduct or councils can regulate public use. However, there is guidance and support for councillors around how to respond or how to ignore perhaps comments made on social media, particularly comments made by trolls or other very distressing comments that sometimes occur. And I'd just like to kind of take the opportunity to remind all councillors that the Democratic Services team are there to provide that support and direct you to guidance documents around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Councillor McCraw.
Yeah,
Thank you.
better do it right rather than early.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor McCall. Councillor McLaren, please.
Thank you, Chair. Emily, can I just ask, this report, does it become an agenda item for Cabinet?
No, it's the remit for looking at Code of Conduct complaints sits with the Joint Audit and Standards Committee.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have any further questions from members, please? No. Therefore, I will now open up the item for debate. So if anybody would like to debate this item, can you please raise your hand, please? No, I don't think we've got any debate. Therefore, the recommendation is that the Code of Conduct complaints monitoring information contained in paper JAC/20/16 be noted. There's no need for a vote on this particular one. So thank you, Emily, for your report. Can we now move on to agenda item 11, which is JAC 2017, the forward plan. Are there any suggestions, comments or amendments on the forward plan, please? Please use the raise hand function. Catherine, please. No?
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Yes, if I could just mention that we have got some changes to make to the forward plan. We had been working behind the scenes for an updated version, but unfortunately I think the version that's in the pack today isn't the updated version that we had been working on. So I believe, I see Mandy's popped onto the screen as well. I think Mandy is going to circulate the revised version to councillors after the meeting this morning. What I was just going to say was just to confirm what is on there for your May meeting. Obviously that's your next meeting. So the items that are on there for the May meeting is the joint audit plan for 2021, the annual audit letter for 2019-20. There will be the annual internal audit report, the backward looking for 2021, the joint annual governance statement for 2021, the ESG investment report that was requested, and then if necessary, any constitutional update or complaints monitoring report from the monitoring officer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Matheson, please.
Yeah, yeah. Catherine did just say joint audit plan, so that the date's been corrected on that first item. Then you're saying, is it? I was just looking at what's originally there, and it says 1920, but you said 2021, and I like to think you're probably right.
Yes, because it's 2021 audit of accounts, councillor. Yes.
Right, that's fine. Thank you.
Chair, if I can just come in and apologise for the report that was circulated, and I, as Catherine has said, that we have been working in the background, and that updated forward plan will be with members later on this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mandy. More than happy for that. Thank you for that. Therefore, if there are no further questions, this concludes the meeting. So I'd like to thank Suresh and Vicky and all officers and members for attending this morning. The next meeting is currently scheduled for the 17th of May, commencing at 9:30. So thank you, everybody, for attending this morning, and I wish you all a good day.